Hey mamas, papas, and curious minds. Today I'm going to be diving into a topic that I get asked quite often, and that is why is homeschooling actually illegal in Germany? So it's not just that it's frowned upon, it could lead to fines, court cases, and the risk of losing custody of your child. And I'll also touch on why this topic has been coming up often of late. So let's just unpack that, and I'll also touch on how COVID-19 put the system to test. Hey guys, and welcome back to AKA Mama. If you're new to my channel, my name is Tafara. I'm a Zimbabwean mama bear raising an absolutely amazing 3-year-old son here in Germany. So how this homeschooling topic has come up is, for those of you that have been watching and following since the beginning, if you recall my first episode, I, touched on the topic of how finding a daycare in Germany is so difficult. And for us, it took us 3 years. Good news is we finally now have a daycare. Um, I did promise to dedicate an episode to that channel. I currently don't have the bandwidth to get into that topic. Oh my gosh, it was just a nightmare. Happy to have that said. But whilst speaking, with family and friends about this daycare topic, they're like, oh my gosh, it took you guys 3 years to get a daycare. Are you already looking into, signing them up at some junior school? Or is homeschooling an option for you? Many people have also said that, if you have difficulties finding, a junior school for him, at least you can just homeschool. Not in Germany. We can't, it's illegal. And I'm just going to touch on the background of that. Homeschooling means educating children at home, either by the parents or tutors. And in some countries like the US, UK, Australia, it's legal and it's actually growing in popularity. But in Germany, it's not just rare, but it's actually banned by the law. And I'm going to touch on how we got here. So Germany's mandatory school attendance law, which is called Schulpflicht, dates back to over 100 years. This was implemented in 1919 and reinforced after World War II. And the whole goal or the ideal was to, to have all children on a uniform curricula and to also avoid having big variations of what children are learning and, to avoid extremist situations or cult-like education practices being a part of the society. In 2006, there was a court case where a family was trying, to homeschool their child for religious purposes. And what was the verdict? Homeschooling could undermine children's right to a diverse worldview and civic integration. So, that was confirmation that this is something that is not legal in this country and to date is not accepted. Of course, there's always those people that ask what actually happens if you try and homeschool your child. Well, of course, because you're breaking the law, you could pay a fine of up to 1,000 euros per child. There's going to be litigation from the Schulamt. You're probably going to get visits from the Jugendamt, which is social services or social welfare, whatever you call it in your country, and you may risk losing custody of your child. I've also read of a story where a family was homeschooling their child, the government found out, and then they fled the country to the US because they didn't want to risk losing custody of their child or children. I don't remember which it was, but I can look for the article and put the link below. So then 2020 COVID hit and the impossible had to become a reality. Because of lockdown, children couldn't go to school and well, teachers also couldn't go to work. So homeschooling had to be put in place. But for the lawmakers, it was very important that they have the right distinction. Here in Germany, it was not called homeschooling, it was called Fernunterricht, which means remote lessons. So each German state, of course, scrambled, to try and get the schools and the children set up, make sure all the kids had the devices, the right online platforms, and taking the EU GDPR into consideration was a very difficult time to navigate. Homeschooling was not allowed in all. Okay, we have 16 states, but I know that Baden-Württemberg had a different exception. They had a different model, but homeschooling was still not allowed. In that state, kids could be excused by their parents without the necessity of a doctor's note, which is a big deal in Germany. So, the pandemic exposed a very, very big gap. Not every child had a laptop. Not every teacher had experience teaching online. and parents were basically somewhat left alone to figure this out, especially if you think that this is a society where homeschooling is forbidden. That meant all parents had no experience with homeschooling. In societies where it's legal, at least you have a share of parents that are familiar with it, and they can be somewhat a support system for the others. But here parents were really struggling because it was completely foreign. 1 in 3 students didn't have regular contact with their teachers. It was one of those situations where it's like, here's your worksheet and good luck. So, did the pandemic change Germany's views on homeschooling? Absolutely not. Most politicians and institutions still deem homeschooling as something that's not good for social cohesion. So yeah, we reset factory settings after COVID, and business as usual. Homeschooling is illegal. I know families that have relocated to Spain or to other countries because it was so important for them to be able to teach their kids by themselves at home. Yeah, which I find interesting. COVID experience left a mark on the society. There's some parents that now truly understand and appreciate the work of teachers and the school system. And then there's those who ask themselves, hey, if I was allowed to homeschool during the pandemic, why am I being punished, or why would I be punished if I wanted to do it now? As a mom myself, I see both sides. Of course, schools offer structure, socialization, and support, but families, especially today, are very diverse. So, shouldn't the system be accommodating of both family types or parenting types, especially in a country as modern as Germany? What do you think? Should homeschooling be legal with regulations, or is the current system protecting something too large to risk losing? Drop a comment below. I'd be interested in hearing your views. If you live in a country where you homeschool, feel free to share your experiences. If you live in Germany and you have this dire, desire to want to homeschool, or, I'd be interested in hearing your reasons. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and see you next time.
Like, comment, subscribe, and share.